Right, okay. Guys, concentrate on this. So this will give you a clear indication with regard to the entire theory which we have been discussing in the class for the almost 4 to 5 months. So basically starting from SLOS 200 and ending from SLOS 550, which we just discussed today. So this will give you a comprehensive understanding with regard to all the elements which we discussed for your AAT final FCA subject, where we will be starting from SLOS 200. So please remember, this will give you a overall understanding with regard to the entire scope, where you need to study based on this short note. So if you study based on this short note, I have compiled all the important elements which we have discussed in the class, as well as all the important elements which the examiner have already been tested in the exam itself, right? So starting from SLOS 200, so basically we are discussing about ethical requirements which is applicable to the auditor. So in that context, we have been discussing there are 6 ethical requirements. So starting from independence, integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality and professional behavior. So those are the main ethical requirements which we discuss under the standard, which is applicable to the auditor when conducting their assurance services. So basically independence we segregated into 2, physical and mental as well. Then we discuss about threats to ethical requirements. So when you are discussing about the threats, we discuss about self-review threat, self-interest threat, familiarity threat, intermediation threat and advocacy. So those are the main elements which we have discussed under SLOS 200, plus those are the main areas which has been frequently tested at the exam as well. So I wanted all of you to concentrate these elements when you are studying SLOS 200 plus the ethical requirements as well. Then moving on, we discuss about SLOS 240, that is fraud and errors. We draw a mastermind map when we are discussing that lesson in the classroom. So these are the important elements that you need to concentrate when you are studying SLOS 240. So basically the fraud and errors, then the definition of fraud. I have given you a clear example of how to remember the definition. There are 3 questions to be asked: who is doing a fraud, why they are doing the fraud, how they are doing the fraud. So that the answer which you are receiving to these 3 questions will be define the definition of fraud. Then we discuss about the definition of errors, then the management responsibility with regard to fraud and errors. So it has been segregated into 2, the prevention and detection of fraud and errors, plus the implementation of a proper accounting and internal control system. Then we discuss about the auditor's responsibility. We broadly categorize into 4, having discussions with the management and having discussions with the audit team as well. Having discussions with the audit team, and you need to perform risk assessment procedure, then inquire from management, and upon completing all these 3 procedures, when you come across an indication which leads to a fraud and error, so those are the 3 aspects that you need to look at it. So the nature of the indication, the possibility of that indication converted into a reality, as well as the impact which those indications or the fraud and error will have on the financial statements as well as on the audit opinion as well. So collating all these, we discuss about the fraud risk factors. So fraud risk factors are broadly categorized under 3: opportunities, employee attitudes, incentives and pressure. Moving on to SLOS 570, going concern. These are the main areas which we have discussed under going concern. So what do you mean by going concern? The management responsibility with regard to the appropriateness of the going concern assumption. Then the factors affecting going concern. Basically we have discussed 3 indicators: financial indicators, operational and other indicators. Then the auditor's responsibility as well. So when we are discussing about the auditor's responsibility, we segregated into 3 categories. Number 1, the material uncertainty. Then obtaining sufficient and appropriate audit evidences with regard to the going concern assumption. Plus you need to evaluate the impact which has on the audit opinion as well as on the financial statements. Then we discuss about the final segment: can the auditor come to the final conclusion by just seeing the indicators as well. So this is basically a practical scenario which we analyze in the classroom. So I wanted you to refer the theory note under these segments as well. Then moving on, SLOS 500, a standard which has been frequently tested at the exam. So we categorize 5 to 6 important topics when we are discussing the standard called audit evidence. So basically the definition of audit evidence, then the key characteristics of audit evidence. As you know, there are 2: sufficient and appropriate. So what do you mean by sufficient? How much of audit evidence that you are going to collect? and the appropriate applicable to reliability, quality and the relevance of the audit evidence that you are going to obtain. Then we discuss about methods of obtaining audit evidence. So we broadly categorize those methods into 3 segments: the risk assessment procedures, test of controls and substantive procedures. So the risk assessment will mainly focusing on the audit risk and the element of the audit risk, whereas TOC, test of controls, are mainly focusing on EEC of the accounting and internal control system. So what do you mean by EEC? Existence, effectiveness and continuity. Then we consider about the substantive procedures while discussing about accounting assertions as well. Then we discuss about the factors when deciding the sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. So there are 4 factors to be considered: materiality of the item which you are searching for audit evidences, then the inherent control risk and the nature of the accounting and internal control systems, then source of audit evidence, the source which you obtain in the audit evidence. 4th point would be the knowledge of the business as well as the experience, the previous experience that the auditor is having on the client as well. So while collating all these, we segregated the audit risk into 2 broader categories: risk of material misstatements and detection risk. But when you further analyze audit risk of material misstatements can be further segregated into inherent and control as well. So we have a detailed discussion on that as well. Then relating the methods to procedures, there are 3 methods to obtain audit evidences, and there are 8 methods to obtain 8 procedures to obtain audit evidences as well. So basically we have summarized under 6: inspection, observation, questionnaire and confirmation, analytical review procedures, recalculations and reperformance. So inspection we further segregated into 2: document inspection as well as fixed asset inspection. So upon completing all these areas, we have concluded SLOS 500 as well. Right, moving on to SLOS 220, that is quality control. When you analyze the past papers, each and every year, when you analyze the last 5 years past papers, each and every year, 1 question came from this standard covering 5 marks. Right, so these are the important elements which we discuss under SLOS 220 quality control. Basically the definition of quality control, what do you mean by quality control? Then the stages of quality control, we have segregated into 2: overall audit firm level as well as individual audit level. Then we discuss about the engagement partner. Then we discuss about EQCR. What do you mean by EQCR? Engagement Quality Control Review. Then we discuss about the elements of the quality control. Basically we have identified 6 elements, starting from leadership responsibility, then ethical requirements, acceptance and continuation of relationship, that is client relationship, assignment of work, engagement performance, further segregated into 3: direction, supervision and review, consultation and EQCR, finally review and monitoring. Then we discuss about SLOS 315, that is basically knowledge of the business. So what do you mean by knowledge of the business? Factors to be considered when obtaining knowledge of the business and advantages as well. So this is basically a small standard which we discuss, which has not been frequently tested at the exam, but there is a high tendency of testing in this time as well. Then we had a detailed discussion in our theory class with regard to internal control, where we spent more than 1 month. So we discuss about business processes. There are 7 business processes which we discuss: revenue and debtors, purchases and creditors, cash and bank, then inventory, PP&E and salaries and wages. All these business processes we'll discuss in 2 angles: internal controls which are applicable for all these business processes, and the audit procedures that the audit is going to perform to validate the accuracy or validate the assertions of all these individual balances. Then we discuss about the definition of internal controls, then the objectives of internal controls. There are 3: reliability of the financial reporting, efficiency and effectiveness of the operations, and the compliance with laws and regulations as well. Then we discuss about inherent limitations of internal control. We have discussed 5. Finally, we discuss about the elements of internal control: control environment, control activities. When we are discussing about control activities, we discuss about spam soap. Then risk assessment, information and communication, and review and monitoring as well. So those are the main elements which we have discussed under internal control. Guaranteed 1 question will come from internal control under section C, which is basically the applicable marks would be 25 marks. So this area would be one of the key areas as students you need to focus on. Then joining to the internal control, we discuss about risk. So when we are discussing about risk, these are the main elements which we discuss under risk. What do you mean by risk? Then the elements of risk, basically internal risk and external risk. Internal risk we further segregated into 4: operational, fraud, compliance and reputational. Then when we discuss about the external risk, we segregated it into general business environment as well as specific business environment. Under the general business environment, we discuss about pest factors or pestal factors. Then we have the in detail discussion with regard to the risk management framework, and this is one of the key areas which has been frequently tested at the exam as well. So basically, when you look at the risk management framework broadly categorized under 3: risk assessment, risk response and monitoring. When we further analyze risk assessment, subdivided into 3 categories: identification of risk, analysis of risk and risk evaluation as well. So once you completed the risk assessment, then come the second stage, which is the risk response, where you need to respond to the identified risk. Finally, you need to have a proper monitoring and review as well. Then finally, we discuss about the risk mitigating techniques. There are 4 mitigating techniques: risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk acceptance and the risk minimization as well. So risk minimization would be the mostly used technique when it's come to the practical context. So under risk minimization, we discuss about internal control, diversification, operational plus geographical diversification. Then we discuss about BCP, business contingency plan, and the risk sharing as well. So this area also has been frequently tested along with the internal control. So you need to be very focused on those 2 areas when you are getting ready for the final exam. Right, then we move to the accounting standards once again. We discuss about SLAS 230 audit documentation, the definition of audit documentation, advantages of audit documentation, then the factors to be included in documentation, then the nature, timing and extent of the audit documentation and audit filing as well. So audit file will further segregated into 2, current audit file as well as the permanent audit file. Again, we discuss about SLAS 580, which is directly linked with the events occurring after the reporting date accounting standard. So we discuss about the subsequent events. So what do you mean by subsequent events and that standard? We further segregated into 3 categories. So the first threshold would be events occurring after the reporting period and prior to the audit report date. That would be the first segment. Then the second segment would be factors discovered after the audit report but prior to the financial statements issued to third parties. That would be the second step. And the third stage would be factors discovered after issuing the financials to third parties. So we had a lengthy discussion of all these segments in our theory class. Then moving on to SLAS 700, basically 10% of the syllabus contained from this segment. So we discuss about audit report. So basically we discuss about the content of the audit report and the types of audit report. So when we discuss about the types of the audit report, we further segregated into 2. Unmodified audit opinion and the modified audit opinion. So if the auditor is issuing an unmodified audit opinion, that means we don't have any issue. But when it's come to the modified opinion, that is the point where we have a concern. So when we analyze in the modified audit opinion, we segregated that into 2 categories: disagreement with management and the scope limitation. If the disagreement with management is material but not pervasive, we will go for a qualified opinion. If the disagreement with management both material and pervasive, we'll go for adverse opinion. Then we discuss about the scope limitation as well on the same scenario. If the scope limitation is material but not pervasive, we'll go for a qualified opinion. If the scope limitation both material and pervasive, we go for a disclaimer of opinion as well. And apart from that, we discuss about the emphasis of meta paragraph as well. So I have not included that, the emphasis of meta paragraph to this segment, since I don't have enough space in the board. Right, then we discuss about the corporate governance. Basically that would be the first segment of your syllabus. So what do you mean by corporate governance? The advantages of corporate governance, then the elements of corporate governance and the audit committee and the functions of the audit committee. Then we discuss about the agency theory plus the responsibilities of the directors and the responsibilities of the shareholders as per the corporate governance thresholds. So those areas needs to be concentrated when you are studying. Then we discuss about IT controls, which is directly linked with internal controls. So we discuss about general controls. There are 5 general controls, then the application controls as well. So the general controls basically focusing on the entire business organization as one unit, whereas application controls basically focusing on the accounting aspects. So the application control again further segregated into 2: input controls, which is directly applicable to the input to the accounting process, which is transaction and events. Then the processing controls, which is directly linked with the processing step of the accounting process. Finally, the output controls, which is directly are related to the financial statements as well. So those are the main elements which we discuss under IT related controls as well. Then we discuss about assurance engagement. Basically 5% of your syllabus contained from assurance engagement. Again, this has been frequently tested at the exam. So when you analyze the past papers, you will see that under section A, most of the time a question comes from assurance engagement covering 5 marks of your paper. So then here we discuss about the definition of assurance engagement. I have discussed 2 important definitions in our theory class. Then the types of assurance engagement, reasonable assurance engagement and the limited assurance engagement. Then the elements of assurance engagement. There are 5 elements: 3-party relationship, subject matter, criteria, sufficient and appropriate audit evidence and the audit report as well. So what are the 3 parties which is involved? The users of the financial statements, the parties who are responsible for the financial statements and the practitioner. So what will be the subject matter? That is basically the financial statement. So what are the evaluation criteria? Whether those financial statements are in line with Sri Lanka accounting standards and whether those financial statements gives a true and fair view. Then you need to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Covering all these aspects, you need to issue a assurance report as well. Then we discuss about inherent limitations of assurance engagement. There are 5. We discuss in detail in the class, and the advantages of assurance engagement. Then we discuss about non-assurance services as well. So the non-assurance services first segregated into 2: related services and other services. We have a detailed discussion covering the entire segment. Then we discuss about terms of engagement, SLS 210, where we discuss about the engagement letter. So what do you mean by engagement letter? Then the points to be included in the engagement letter. We have segregated into 3 main points to be included based on the auditor's preference, plus the points to be included depending on the situation as well. So altogether there are 16 points to be covered under this segment, and we discuss about recurrent audits as well. Then moving on, we discuss about audit planning, SLS 300. What do you mean by audit planning? The elements of audit plan we have segregated into 2: overall audit strategy plus the audit plan as well. Then we discuss about the advantages of audit planning and the factors to be considered when developing audit plan as well. So those are the main areas which we covered under SLS 300. Then moving on to the final segments, we discuss about audit materiality, SLS 320, overall material level. Then we discuss about performance materiality and the relationship between the materiality and the audit risk. So those are the main 3 areas which has been tested frequently at the exam. Then moving on to SLS 580, written representation. We discuss about the definition of representation and the factors to be considered once you obtain a representation as well. Then we discuss about SLS 505, external confirmation. We further segregated it into positive confirmation request as well as negative confirmation request likewise. Then finally today we discuss about SLS 550, that is basically related parties. So I would say this mastermind map covering 95% of the entire syllabus, where when you are studying your theoretical lessons which I have been discussed with you, so basically you need to study those theoretical lessons while reviewing this mastermind map as well. I think this will give you a clear indication with regard to the theoretical aspects which we have discussed for the past 4 to 5 months.